My perfect life was a lie. She used our savings to cheat on me. Robert woke up early, as he always did. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across their bedroom. He could hear the faint hum of the coffee machine in the kitchen downstairs, the smell of freshly brewed coffee already filling the house. It was a good morning, like so many others. His wife, Jennifer, was still asleep beside him, her breathing soft and even. They had been together for over 10 years now, and though they had seen their share of challenges, raising 2 kids, balancing careers, managing finances, they had always managed to pull through. Robert couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in their life together. They had built something solid, something to be proud of. The house they lived in was a reflection of that. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect for their family. Cozy, yet spacious enough to feel like home. Their kids, 8-year-old Max and 6-year-old Sophie, had their own rooms, their own space to grow, and their laughter echoed throughout the halls. Their life was everything Robert had dreamed of when he first met Jennifer in college. Over the years, Robert's career had also flourished. He had worked his way up at a software company, earning a respectable position as a project manager. Though the hours were long and the pressure was constant, he knew the sacrifices he was making would pay off in the end. He could already see the fruits of his labor, a more comfortable life for his family, a future full of possibilities. His days were filled with meetings and deadlines, but when he came home, it all melted away. Home was his sanctuary, and Jennifer was his anchor. Jennifer, too, had a promising career. She had recently been promoted to senior marketing manager at her firm, and Robert couldn't have been prouder of her. She had always been ambitious, driven, and highly respected in her field. But despite her professional success, she had always made their family her top priority. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her from the start, her ability to balance ambition with love, career with family. This morning, like so many others, Robert's mind wandered to the future. They had been talking about taking a family vacation, a trip to the coast they had been planning for months. It would be a much-needed break from the chaos of work and life. They were both excited, and Robert was already envisioning the laughter, the sandy beaches, the evenings spent watching sunsets with a cold drink in hand. He smiled at the thought. But in the back of his mind, there was a small, nagging feeling, a sense of unease that he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't a specific thought, just a general sense that something wasn't quite right. He pushed it aside. Life was good. Jennifer was happy. He had everything he could ever want. Still, as he watched her sleep, something inside of him whispered, "But how well do you really know her?" The question was fleeting, just a passing thought. Robert shook it off and leaned over to kiss Jennifer on the cheek, gently waking her. She stirred and smiled sleepily, her eyes soft and full of love. He kissed her again, this time on the lips, and she wrapped her arms around him in a hug. "Morning," she murmured, still half asleep. "Good morning, babe." "Ready for another busy day?" he replied, brushing a lock of hair out of her face. Jennifer smiled, but there was something about the way she looked at him that morning, a brief, almost imperceptible moment of hesitation that made his chest tighten. But Robert, ever the optimist, decided to let it go. Today was going to be just another beautiful day. The days that followed were much like the ones before, but the feeling Robert couldn't shake began to grow stronger. It was as though the small cracks in his perfect life were starting to become more noticeable, though they were still barely visible to anyone else. Jennifer's work schedule had become more erratic. At first, Robert didn't think much of it. She was in the middle of a big campaign at work, and he knew how demanding her job could be. But as the weeks passed, the late nights seemed to multiply. Jennifer would leave after dinner, sometimes not returning until after the kids were already in bed. She'd always come home exhausted, but a quick kiss and a few words of affection were all they exchanged before she'd collapse into bed, too tired to talk. Robert didn't complain. After all, he was equally busy with his own work, often staying up late to finish project deadlines. It wasn't unusual for him to pass out on the couch before making it to bed some nights. But something about Jennifer's increasing absences didn't sit right with him. At first, he tried to keep the peace. Their marriage had always been built on trust, and he didn't want to be the one to stir the pot with unnecessary accusations. But then there were small things, insignificant, almost yet enough to make Robert start questioning his reality. One evening, after dinner, Robert noticed that Jennifer had left her phone on the kitchen counter, face up. It wasn't like her to forget it, especially when she'd always been so attached to it. It was sitting there, silently glowing in the dim light of the room, displaying a message from an unknown number. He couldn't see the message itself, but the fact that it was someone unfamiliar set off a spark of curiosity. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, maybe it was a colleague or a client. But when he picked it up to check the time, the phone unlocked automatically. He hadn't meant to snoop, but his fingers betrayed him, swiping the screen. His eyes scanned the message thread quickly, catching only a few words. "Are you free tonight? I miss you." His heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in years, he felt a sharp pang of doubt. The message was clearly personal, too personal for a simple work relationship. Robert quickly placed the phone back down, his mind racing. Was he overreacting? He had no evidence, nothing concrete, but the feeling in his gut told him something was wrong. He had always prided himself on his trust in Jennifer, but that message felt like a betrayal in itself. The next few days, Robert tried to push the thought aside. He didn't want to confront Jennifer without proof, and he couldn't bear the idea of accusing her of something without a solid reason. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. Jennifer continued to be distant, her excuses growing more elaborate. A dinner meeting that turned into a late-night strategy session. A weekend work retreat that kept her away from home for 3 days. The cracks were no longer just small fissures. They were widening. One evening, when Jennifer was working late again, Robert went to their bedroom to grab a shirt. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just getting ready for bed, when his eyes fell on something out of place. A small, black lace item of clothing, something that clearly wasn't his. His pulse quickened as he stared at it, unsure whether to touch it or leave it alone. He couldn't be certain, but it didn't belong to Jennifer. He felt a rush of panic. Had she been seeing someone? He couldn't help but wonder. The evidence was piling up in front of him, each piece contributing to a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all, trying to find a way to justify it all, but deep down, he knew. This wasn't just a phase of overwork. Jennifer was hiding something from him. The next morning, after barely sleeping through the night, Robert took his usual place at the kitchen table. Jennifer walked in, bright-eyed and radiant as she kissed him hello, her phone already in her hand. A part of him wanted to bring it up. He wanted to confront her, to demand the truth. But another part of him, deeply rooted in love and fear of losing everything, held back. He couldn't go down that road without certainty. Not yet. So, Robert said nothing. But the doubt lingered, and the cracks deepened. Robert sat in front of the computer, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. The evening had settled in, the kids were asleep, and Jennifer was working late again. As usual, Robert was taking a moment to review their finances, something that had become a routine part of their lives. They were planning a family vacation, and he wanted to ensure everything was in order. But tonight, the task felt different. The usual act of balancing accounts seemed almost mechanical, his mind elsewhere, preoccupied with the thoughts that had been weighing on him. Then, he noticed something out of place. His hand hovered over the screen as he reviewed the credit card statements. He'd seen these entries a dozen times before: groceries, utilities, gas, dinner dates. But this time, one charge jumped out at him. It was from a hotel, an upscale resort, in fact. The charge was substantial, $500 for a one-night stay. His brow furrowed as he clicked on the details. The date of the charge was the exact time Jennifer had told him she would be out of town for a business trip. Robert's pulse quickened, and his stomach twisted. He didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was an honest mistake, a mix-up in booking. But as he scrolled through the rest of the statement, the unease grew deeper. Another charge from the same hotel, a few days later. This one was for a romantic dinner for two, a service that Robert was fairly certain was not part of any business conference. A third charge, even larger, for a spa treatment package. He blinked, disbelief clouding his mind. None of these were expenses for a work trip, these were the kinds of luxuries one could only enjoy on a vacation with someone else. Robert felt his breath catch in his throat. His hands began to tremble as he went back to the hotel website and scrolled through their offerings. A luxurious resort, tucked away on the outskirts of the city. A place people went for romantic getaways, not for business meetings. His mind raced with questions. How could she do this to him? How could she spend his savings, on someone else, on a secret life? The pain was instant, raw, and overwhelming. He felt betrayed, but more than that, he felt foolish. He had trusted Jennifer without question. All the late nights, the unexplained absences, the vague responses. It was all starting to make sense, in the most gut-wrenching way. As he stared at the screen, his eyes landed on the final charge: a private dinner reservation for two. The timing matched up perfectly with the dates she had been gone. Robert's mind couldn't stop processing the information. Every detail he had ignored before, the way Jennifer always seemed distant, how she was constantly too busy, now took on a new, painful clarity. It wasn't about work, it was about someone else. A mix of anger, confusion, and sorrow surged through him. How could she betray him like this? He thought back to their early days, how she had always been there for him, how they had built this life together. Now, that same life felt like it was crumbling in front of him. Without thinking, Robert picked up the phone. His hands were shaking as he dialed the hotel. His heart raced with a mixture of dread and hope, but deep down, he knew what was coming. The receptionist answered, and after a brief exchange, Robert confirmed what he feared. Jennifer had checked into the hotel with a man. They had shared the room, spent the weekend together, and left only after the weekend had ended. The confirmation was the final blow. Robert didn't know what to feel anymore. He felt numb, as if his body was no longer his own, like the life he had built was suddenly slipping through his fingers. His marriage had just been shattered, and he wasn't sure how to begin putting the pieces back together. He hung up the phone, feeling hollow. He stared at the screen for a long time, the evidence now undeniable, the truth laid bare in front of him. Jennifer had betrayed him. She had used their hard-earned savings to fund her affair, to build a secret life, while he had been left in the dark, living a lie. The realization hit him like a freight train, and Robert was suddenly consumed by a tidal wave of emotions: anger, heartbreak, humiliation, and disbelief. How could the woman he trusted with everything do this to him? He sat there for what felt like hours, motionless, trying to process the depth of what he had just uncovered. The perfect life, the perfect marriage, all of it had been a lie. The night stretched on, but Robert couldn't tear his mind away from the cold, hard facts. His eyes kept flicking to the computer screen, where the evidence of his wife's betrayal was laid out in stark black and white detail. The charges, the hotel stays, the romantic dinners, each item like a nail in the coffin of everything he had believed to be true. The house was eerily quiet. The kids were fast asleep, and Jennifer had yet to return home. Robert felt like he was trapped in a fog, his mind clouded by a mixture of disbelief and deep sorrow. He kept going back to the receipts, running over them again and again, as though hoping something would change, some hidden explanation would make it all make sense. But it didn't. The truth was undeniable. Jennifer was having an affair. The reality of it settled in slowly, painfully, like a weight on his chest. He had always trusted her without question, and now he found himself standing on the precipice of a nightmare that he never could have imagined. He had no idea who the man was, but he was determined to find out. Robert's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't sure if it was the fear of what he might find or the need to uncover every last shred of truth that made him continue. Either way, he couldn't stop now. His heart pounded in his chest as he began to search. He started by reviewing their shared calendar. It was one of the few things they kept synchronized. There, in plain sight, were entries for the business trip, except now he saw them through a different lens. The trips she had mentioned were all clearly marked as business, but he noticed something else: the gaps in her schedule. Jennifer had strategically arranged her meetings in a way that gave her plenty of time to get away. The timing, in retrospect, was almost too perfect. He checked the flights she'd taken. She had flown out at times that matched the hotel charges, and the destinations lined up as well. He could see the details of her bookings, and the confirmation emails that were still sitting in their joint inbox, reminders of trips she had taken while he had stayed home. Then, his search led him to something unexpected, a series of text messages. While Jennifer's phone had been locked up tight when he briefly checked it that night, he now had the opportunity to review their shared email account. The first message that caught his attention was from a name he didn't recognize, Jack. It was a short, but intimate note: "Can't wait to see you again. You make me feel like I'm the only one that matters. I'll be waiting for you." The message made Robert's stomach churn. He had known for a while that something wasn't right, but seeing this direct communication, this proof of the emotional connection between Jennifer and another man, struck him deeply. His breath became shallow, his hands clammy. A wave of anger started to rise in him. How could she do this? How could she betray everything they had built together for some affair? For this man? But even amid the anger, another emotion surfaced. Sadness. A crushing sense of loss. He had no idea when things had started to deteriorate between them. He had always thought they were happy, that their family was solid. But now he was beginning to see how Jennifer had been slipping away, little by little, until she had found someone else to fill the void she no longer felt with him. Robert's mind spiraled. He felt betrayed, yes, but he also felt incredibly foolish. All those late nights he'd spent working, all those times he'd excused Jennifer's behavior, telling himself she was just tired or overworked. Now, it all made sense. She had been emotionally checked out for a long time, and he had been blind to it. But he couldn't stop now. He needed to know everything. If he was going to face her, he needed all the facts, every shred of evidence. It wasn't enough to have suspicions anymore. He needed answers. He scrolled through the email chain, looking for any more clues. There were more messages, more intimate notes between Jennifer and Jack. The language was casual, but the undertones were clear. Jennifer had been deeply involved with him, and their relationship had gone far beyond anything Robert could have imagined. The pain that had been simmering inside him for days now erupted into something more visceral. A knot formed in his stomach, and he could feel his hands shaking with the weight of it all. He thought about confronting Jennifer, demanding the truth, but the truth was already laid out in front of him. The truth was in the emails, in the hotel receipts, in the charges to their bank account. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The anger inside him was hot and raw, but beneath that, there was a profound sense of loss. How could everything they had built, everything he had worked for, come crashing down so quickly? For the first time, Robert realized something painful. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was no longer the person he thought she was. She was someone else, someone who had made choices that left him in the dust. Choices that had torn their family apart, all for a fleeting affair that was never meant to last. And now, Robert had to face the truth. The truth that Jennifer's betrayal wasn't just a single moment, it had been months in the making. It was nearly midnight when Jennifer finally returned home. Robert had spent the entire evening pacing the living room, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had uncovered. His thoughts were a blur, a cacophony of anger, sadness, and disbelief. He had the answers now, but none of them brought him any comfort. In fact, the more he learned, the more empty he felt. When the front door creaked open, Robert was already sitting on the couch, his arms crossed tightly in front of him. He heard Jennifer's footsteps in the hallway, the soft shuffle of her shoes against the floor. She was humming a tune, clearly in a good mood, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in the living room. As she entered, Robert didn't speak at first. He just watched her. Jennifer was still wearing her work clothes, tailored blouse, pencil skirt, and high heels that clicked as she walked across the room. She paused when she saw him sitting there, her eyes flickering with the faintest hint of surprise. "Hey," she said, her voice warm, yet tinged with exhaustion. "What's going on? You're still up?" Robert's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained steady, calm. Too calm. He was in control now. The time for denial was over. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low but firm. Jennifer's smile faltered, and she set her purse down on the nearby table. She looked at him curiously, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. What's wrong?" Robert took a deep breath, fighting the wave of emotion that was threatening to overwhelm him. He was done with the guessing game, done with the uncertainty. It was time to confront the truth. "I know about the affair, Jennifer," he said, the words hanging in the air between them like a heavy weight. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she seemed frozen in place. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Robert could see the panic in her eyes, the way her body stiffened. But he wasn't finished yet. "I know about the hotel stays," he continued, his voice growing more intense. "I know about the dinners, the trips, and the charges to our account. I know you've been seeing someone else. And I know you've been using our money to fund it." He stood up now, his fists clenched by his sides, but he wasn't angry, not yet. The anger was coming, but for now, he was still reeling from the shock of it all. His emotions were a tangled mess: betrayal, hurt, confusion, but most of all, there was a deep, searing sadness. Jennifer took a step back, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she shook her head, as if trying to deny what Robert had said. You don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." Robert's eyes narrowed. He had heard that phrase before, "It's not what you think," and it was always a lie. A desperate attempt to deflect, to cover up the truth. "Then explain it to me, Jennifer," he said, his voice rising. "Explain why you've been hiding all of this from me. Explain why you thought it was okay to spend our money on a romantic getaway. Explain why you thought it was okay to lie to me, to our family." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, and she took a tentative step forward. "Robert, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice cracked as she spoke, but Robert wasn't interested in apologies. Not yet. He needed answers. He needed to understand how this had happened, why she had chosen to betray him like this. "You didn't mean for it to go this far," he repeated, his voice growing colder. "Jennifer, you chose this. You made a decision to be with him. You chose to lie to me, to your kids, to everything we've built together." Jennifer wiped her eyes, but the tears only seemed to add to the broken image before him. "I didn't want to hurt you. But I felt lost. I've been so overwhelmed, so disconnected, and he made me feel special again. I didn't know how to tell you, Robert. I didn't know how to fix what was wrong between us." Robert's chest tightened. He had heard her words, but they didn't bring him any peace. In fact, they only deepened the hurt. "You felt lost?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You felt disconnected? And you thought the answer was to sleep with someone else? To lie to me for months? To throw away everything we've worked for?" Jennifer took another step forward, this time more desperately. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I swear I do." Robert shook his head, backing away from her. The tears in her eyes, the regret in her voice, it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to pull the I love you card now. You made your choice. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Jennifer's face crumpled as she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The sight of her broken, vulnerable, and begging for forgiveness almost made Robert want to collapse under the weight of the devastation. But he couldn't. He couldn't let this destroy him any further. He stood there for a long moment, watching her. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he loved, was now a stranger in front of him. Everything had changed. The silence between them was thick, heavy. He could feel the walls closing in. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter but resolute. "I can't do this anymore, Jennifer. I need space. I need time to figure out what's next. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." As he turned away from her, leaving her sobbing on the floor, Robert realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The life they had built was shattered, and there was no going back. The next few days felt like a blur to Robert. He stayed in the spare room, avoiding Jennifer as much as possible. The weight of the confrontation still hung in the air, and the house, once filled with the familiar sounds of family life, now felt like a quiet, tense prison. Every time he passed her in the hallway, the guilt and the pain seemed to radiate off of her, but Robert couldn't bring himself to look at her the same way anymore. She was a stranger now. The woman who had promised to stand by him, to share in both the joys and the struggles of life, was no longer the woman he had known. The house was eerily quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant noise from the kids' rooms, was a reminder of what had been lost. Robert found it hard to focus on anything. Work felt like a distant memory. He had barely kept up with his responsibilities, his mind consumed with the images of Jennifer's betrayal. He wasn't sure how long it had been since he had last smiled, since he had felt any sense of hope. He sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, his elbows on his knees, staring into space. Every day was a new wave of pain, of confusion. He had never imagined that this could happen to him. He had trusted Jennifer with everything, his heart, his dreams, his future, and she had shattered it in the most gut-wrenching way possible. As the days wore on, Robert felt a growing sense of anger. It was an anger that simmered just below the surface, building with each passing hour. Anger toward Jennifer for betraying him, for betraying their family. Anger toward himself for not seeing the signs sooner. But mostly, he was angry at the situation itself, the cruel twist of fate that had left him reeling, unable to find solid ground. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him, it was the years of lies. The way Jennifer had carefully orchestrated her double life, keeping him in the dark while she built a secret world of her own. He felt humiliated, embarrassed. They had been a team, or so he had thought. But Jennifer had quietly torn that team apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the wreckage of their marriage. Robert spent his days in a haze, lost in thought, unable to move forward. The thought of confronting her again, of hearing her explain herself, of seeing the regret in her eyes, was too much to bear. The one thing he knew for sure was that he wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The kids were another constant source of heartache. They didn't understand why Mommy and Daddy weren't talking like they used to. They didn't understand why the laughter had stopped, why their parents seemed so distant from one another. Robert tried his best to shield them from the pain of what was happening, but it was impossible to keep up the facade forever. His heart ached every time they asked about Jennifer, every time they knocked on his door asking why he wasn't sleeping in the same room with her anymore. Jennifer tried to reach out. She sent him texts, left him voicemails, and even wrote him a heartfelt letter. But each message, each attempt to reconnect, only deepened the rift between them. Robert wasn't ready to hear her words. Not when every one of them felt like an excuse, a plea for him to simply forgive and forget. He couldn't. Not yet. The hardest part, though, was the silence between them. The absence of the person he thought he could trust the most. Jennifer had been his partner, his confidant, and now all he had were empty walls and unanswered questions. He didn't know how to move forward. He didn't know how to rebuild what had been broken. Every night, Robert would lie awake in the dark, replaying the past in his mind. He would think back to the moments when everything seemed so perfect, the vacations, the family outings, the quiet nights in front of the TV. He could still remember the way Jennifer had looked at him back then, the way she smiled when they talked about their future. Now, that future felt like a distant memory, a dream that had been ripped away. He found himself asking the same question over and over again: how could she do this? How could she betray him, betray everything they had built together, for some fleeting affair? Was their marriage so fragile that it couldn't survive the weight of her lies? As the days dragged on, Robert found solace in small things: long walks by himself, spending time with the kids, keeping busy at work. But even in those moments, the pain never fully left him. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. And then one evening, about a week after the confrontation, Jennifer finally cornered him in the kitchen. She had been patient, waiting for Robert to come to her, but it was clear she couldn't wait any longer. The pain in her eyes was undeniable, but so was the desperation. She needed him to understand, needed him to forgive her. "Robert, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've betrayed your trust in ways I can't even begin to explain. But I love you. I need you to understand that. What I did, it was a mistake. I was lost. I don't know what happened to us, but I want to fix it. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Her words hung in the air, but Robert felt nothing. His heart was hardening with each passing day, and her pleas only pushed him further away. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, but it felt like too little, too late. He looked at her, his face unreadable. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jennifer. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Jennifer's face crumpled as she turned away, tears spilling down her cheeks. Robert watched her for a long moment, but the words didn't come. He wasn't ready to say what she wanted to hear. He wasn't ready to pretend that everything would be okay, that they could somehow fix this. For now, all he could do was take it one day at a time, one painful step after another. The journey ahead was uncertain. The pain would never completely go away, but maybe, just maybe, in time, he would find a way to heal. The days turned into weeks, and Robert found himself locked in an emotional limbo. The turmoil of his heart was matched only by the emptiness of his home. Jennifer had retreated into herself, offering apologies that felt rehearsed, as though she was trying to convince not only him, but herself as well, that their marriage could somehow be salvaged. But Robert wasn't sure anymore. He wasn't sure about anything. He had always been a man of clear decisions, someone who approached problems head-on, someone who believed in the strength of his family. But now, the world felt fractured, like every piece of his life had shattered into a million tiny shards, and he didn't know where to begin picking them up. The weight of his emotions was suffocating: guilt, sadness, anger, and a deep, unshakable betrayal. It wasn't just the affair that had hurt him, it was the realization that Jennifer, the woman he had loved and trusted, had been hiding parts of herself for so long. It had been months of living a double life while he had remained blissfully ignorant. How could he have been so blind? Yet, despite the pain, Robert found himself questioning something deep within. Could he ever forgive Jennifer? Could they somehow rebuild what had been broken? The truth was, he wasn't sure. The love they had shared had been real, but was it enough to heal the wounds Jennifer had inflicted? He wasn't certain. Every time he saw her, her tear-streaked face was a reminder of the betrayal that had torn apart their family, and he could feel the walls between them growing higher and higher. One evening, after dinner, Robert sat alone on the couch, staring out the window at the quiet street outside. The kids were in bed, and Jennifer had gone to her room, as she had been doing for days now. The silence in the house was deafening. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, but beyond that, there was nothing. His mind raced. He thought about what it would mean to stay. Could he truly forgive her? Could he learn to trust her again? The thought of starting over, of somehow rebuilding their marriage, felt almost impossible. But the thought of losing their family, of tearing their children's lives apart, was even worse. He thought about the kids, the way they had noticed the tension in the house, the way they asked questions that Robert couldn't answer. How could he explain what was happening? How could he tell them that the woman they loved had betrayed their father's trust in a way that could never be undone? How could he shatter their world when his own was already in pieces? Then, another thought crept into his mind. What if he left? What if he walked away and found a new life, one where he wasn't constantly haunted by the memory of Jennifer's betrayal? He had always believed in the power of family, in the sanctity of marriage, but now he wasn't sure if that was enough to overcome the hurt. Maybe it was time for a fresh start. But could he really do that? Could he really walk away from everything they had built? Suddenly, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Jennifer was standing in the doorway, her silhouette bathed in the soft glow of the hallway light. He didn't turn to face her. He couldn't. "Robert," she said quietly, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust, and I can't take that back. But please don't give up on us." Robert swallowed hard. His heart ached as he felt her standing there, the distance between them stretching farther with every second that passed. But he couldn't ignore the raw honesty in her voice, the desperation in her eyes. For a moment, he was tempted to reach out to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But he couldn't. He wasn't sure if everything would ever be okay again. "I don't know what to do anymore, Jennifer," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Jennifer's face crumpled at his words, and she took a step forward, her eyes pleading with him. "I understand. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve another chance. But please, Robert, I'm begging you to try. We have so much to lose. We've built a life together, a family. And I love you. I love you so much. Please don't throw that away." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the pain of her own guilt weighing her down. He could hear the tremor in her voice, the fear of losing everything. And yet, despite all of that, Robert still felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to hold on to the idea that love could conquer all, that time could heal all wounds. But deep down, he knew that wasn't always the case. Some wounds didn't heal. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive. He stood up from the couch, his hands trembling. He turned to face her, his eyes locked with hers. The words he needed to say were stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something, anything, that would give her hope. But all he could manage was a painful, helpless sigh. "I don't know if I can do this, Jennifer," he said. "I don't know if I can keep pretending everything will be okay." Jennifer's face fell, and for the first time, Robert saw her as she truly was, broken, vulnerable, and filled with regret. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he turned away from her, walking slowly toward the door. "I need time," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I need time to figure out who I am now. I can't make any decisions in the middle of all this pain." As he stepped out of the room, Jennifer's sobs echoed behind him. But Robert didn't look back. He couldn't. He had reached a crossroads in his life, and he had no idea where the road would lead. Weeks passed, and Robert's life began to take on a different shape. The tension in the house hadn't fully disappeared, but there was a shift. He wasn't sure if it was hope or resignation, but he could feel the distance between him and Jennifer starting to feel less suffocating. The weight of the past lingered, but there was a new kind of clarity in his heart, one that he hadn't had before. During those weeks, Robert did a lot of soul-searching. He spent hours talking with close friends, and sometimes his father, about what had happened. He thought about the life he had with Jennifer, the family they had built together, and the years they'd shared. It was all real, everything about it. The love, the connection, the laughter, the challenges. But then he thought about the betrayal, the lies, and the long nights he spent in pain. Could he live with that? Could he let it define his future? He knew the answer wasn't simple. There was no magic fix, no easy way to erase the hurt. But there was something else, something he hadn't considered before. The power of forgiveness. Forgiving Jennifer didn't mean forgetting what she had done. It didn't mean everything would be okay right away. But it meant choosing to move forward, to heal, to give himself a chance at happiness again. It meant opening the door to possibility. One evening, after weeks of silence and distance, Robert sat in the living room, his thoughts clouded but clearer than they had been in a long time. He knew what he had to do. Jennifer had spent these past few weeks trying to prove her sincerity, doing everything she could to show him how sorry she was, how much she wanted to fix things. She had shown him a side of herself he hadn't seen before, a side that was raw, vulnerable, and willing to confront the pain she had caused. It wasn't easy for Robert to let go of the anger that had been consuming him. It wasn't easy to stop replaying the betrayal over and over in his head. But the truth was, he couldn't keep living in that space of pain and resentment. He had children who needed him to be whole, a life that was still worth living, and a future that was waiting for him. As he sat on the couch that night, the weight of the decision that lay before him pressed heavily on his chest. He knew the road ahead would be long. But the first step, the hardest step, was going to be forgiveness. Jennifer entered the room, her eyes tentative, like she wasn't sure if she should approach him. But Robert gestured for her to sit beside him. "Robert," she said softly, her voice shaky. "I don't know what you've been thinking these past weeks, but I need you to know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't expect everything to go back to normal. I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be the woman you need me to be." Robert looked at her, the woman who had once been everything to him, the woman who had betrayed him, but the woman who still held a place in his heart. She was right, things wouldn't go back to the way they were. But that didn't mean they couldn't build something new. It wouldn't be easy. But nothing worth having ever was. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Robert began, his voice steady but soft. "I won't lie, there's a part of me that's still angry. Still hurt. But I don't want to let that anger define me. I want to heal. I want to find a way forward. And I think, just maybe, I think maybe we can rebuild." Jennifer's face lit up with relief, but Robert held up a hand, signaling for her to listen. "But we can't just move past this. It's going to take time. I'm not going to forgive you overnight. And you have to understand that." "I understand," Jennifer whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes, Robert. I just want to fix this. I want us to heal, together." Robert nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "We have to be honest with each other, Jennifer. And we have to take it one day at a time. I won't promise it will be easy, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give us a chance." Jennifer reached out to take his hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Robert felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. It wasn't the same as before, it couldn't be. But it was a start. Over the next few months, Robert and Jennifer took small, hesitant steps toward rebuilding their relationship. They went to therapy, individually and together, and while it wasn't always easy, they found moments of connection, small sparks of the love they had shared before. They worked on their communication, learning to express their feelings openly without fear of judgment or rejection. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, though it was fragile, like a flower emerging from the cracked ground. Robert's focus shifted. He began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the betrayal, it was about letting go of the anger that threatened to drown him. It was about choosing peace, for his own sake, as much as for Jennifer's. Months passed, and the family slowly found their footing again. The kids sensed the change, though they didn't fully understand it. They could see their parents working through their struggles, talking more, laughing more, and slowly, the atmosphere in the house became lighter. There were still difficult moments, and Robert would always carry the scars of what had happened, but he was learning that healing didn't mean forgetting. Healing meant moving forward, learning to love in a new way, a more honest, more cautious way. One evening, as Robert sat with Jennifer on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her, his heart full of a quiet hope. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's something." Jennifer smiled softly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "It's everything," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Robert squeezed her hand, feeling the strength of their bond in that simple gesture. And in that moment, he knew he was on a path toward healing, a path toward a new beginning. As Robert and Jennifer continue their journey of healing, it's a reminder that forgiveness is not a destination, but a process that takes time, understanding, and patience. If you found this story meaningful or if it's resonated with you in any way, please don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to have you on this journey with us.